Hi everyone, this is Neil. As I promised, here's a short presentation that I've made for you on top tips for doing really well in your Module 1 assignments and hopefully actually enjoying doing them and having a sense of satisfaction out of doing them. It's like you're drawing a little line in the sand now and saying, right, this is where I'm up to in terms of my development as a teacher. And I think it's actually, I realise that writing an assignment obviously is a stressful thing, but I also think it's actually a really nice thing to do, to just reflect on where you're at so far and have a little think about where you want to go from here. I think it's a really good thing to do. I'm recording this because I do find that I often repeat the same advice time and again to different people, and I suppose that's not surprising, is it? Because you all experience the assignment in very similar ways. So what I'm going to do is just very quickly, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with this, just remind you of the overall framework for the assessment. Um, and then I'm just going to give you some top tips for each individual section. Okay, so just to remind ourselves, your assessment does comprise three different sections: the essay, the professional values, and the personal development plan. You hand them all in together, but they're three separate sections. And in total, these three sections need to add up to a 4,000 word assignment. Now, the Sussex rule is that you can come in within 10% either side of that target. So your finished piece of work has to come in between 3,600 and 4,400 words. And on the cover sheet, you need to say how many words you have used. Now, those are just literally your words, because anything that's a quotation, any reference, your bibliography, doesn't count towards your word count. And just to remind you, and if you're not sure about this, just Google it. There's loads of good stuff on up there. And actually, Sussex University, on its InfoSus site, if you Google Sussex University Harvard referencing, you'll find Sussex has got a very nice little guide to using Harvard referencing as well, but you have to use Harvard referencing. Okay, so here are the three sections of your assignment. And I'm just going to remind you what the learning outcomes are. So the longest part is the essay, right, where I suggest you use about 2,500 words. Now don't forget, it's only that 4,000 word target. That's the only one you have to hit. So if we say that we suggest using a certain number of words for each section, that's only because in the past that's what I've found seems to have worked well for people, but it's entirely up to you. You can change these. These aren't set in stone. So the first thing you're looking for is to demonstrate professional competence in teaching, learning, and assessment. So in other words, making it clear that you do know what you're doing as a teacher. This doesn't mean to say that you have to be, you know, brilliant or perfect or, on the old Ofsted grading system, getting a one, getting an outstanding every single time you teach. Because, it's a skill that we're all in the process of learning, teaching. It's a complicated, difficult thing, as we know. And it's something that we're all trying to get better at. So we're looking for competence, not absolute sheer brilliance, and it's completely fine, as I say in the sessions when I work with people on this. It's completely fine to write about an example of teaching where things didn't really go well or didn't go as you'd planned, so long as you show how you've thought about that and what you've learned from that and what you might do differently next time. To me, that absolutely shows professional competence and actually links into the second one, which is we're also looking for you to critically self-evaluate and reflect on your professional performance as a teacher. What's going well, what's not going so well, what do you need to keep on doing, what do you need to stop doing, what do you need to do differently. So really, um, what we're mainly looking for in these assignments is evidence of how you've been thinking as a teacher. What goes through your head when you're teaching, how observant are you about what's going on in your classroom, and what can you do to try and improve. And the title for the essay is Critically Evaluate How You've Used What You've learnt during this module to inform and improve your professional practice in teaching, learning and assessment. So inform, we need to know that, even though you've probably got great instincts as a teacher, that some of the things you're doing as a teacher have been informed by the ideas and information and evidence and research that you've encountered during this first module. There's loads of evidence out there now, we know. Just think of John Hattie and all his work on effect sizes. There's loads of evidence about some of the strategies we can use as teachers which seem broadly to work and be effective. So we don't have to just do it on instinct. We can do it based on what other people have been looking into and researching and the knowledge base that's out there. So we need to know that you're familiar with some relevant parts of that knowledge base, and that ongoingly you're trying to improve your professional practice. Well, that particularly relates to the second learning outcome about critical self-evaluation and reflection. The two key words at the beginning of that title, critically evaluate, What we're looking for is that you don't just describe what you've been doing. You evaluate how effective your teaching's been. So the evaluation, and you'll see this in a slide later on, is what's worked, what hasn't worked, what's my evidence for that. And the critical bit is then stepping back from that and thinking, okay, in that case, why do I think that's happening? What have I learned from it, and what do I need to do differently next time? So again, it's just about answering those questions. The second part of the assessment is your professional values write-up, which again we'll talk about later in this presentation. About 1,000 words for that. And what you're being asked to do is to critically discuss your professional values as teachers in post-compulsory education. This means that you need to say what your values are, talk about what you try to do to make them real. You know, if I say I want my classroom to be a safe environment for everyone, that would be a value. But okay, that's a lovely thing to say. But what is it that I do to try to make that real? And then some reflection on, so right now, how successful do I think I'm being in doing that, and where might I improve further? And that would be the analytical, critical, and self-reflective elements dealt with by answering those questions. And then the final part is to write a short continuing professional development plan for the rest of the PG Cert. There's the template for that on the blog, as I'm sure you're aware. You'll see the template again later in this presentation. And we're looking for just a short, very focused CPD plan, not 101 things you'd like to do, but the 2 or 3 most important areas you want to work on that you feel would make the biggest difference to your teaching. Now, there are 3 separate parts of the assessment, but very often they don't have to overlap at all, but very often people will find that they do tend to overlap because, for example, something that you say you could improve in your essay might be something that then ends up in your CPD plan. So, I mean, there are obvious ways in which the sections might connect with each other. And if they do connect with each other, that's always a nice thing, but it's by no means compulsory. Now, just to remind you, we use the grading criteria that we've been given by Sussex University because they're the criteria that they use for all master's level work right across the university. And the way that the marking system works, you actually get marked with a letter grade, but then those letters translate into percentages. And you're looking at 50% is a pass, 60% is a merit, and 70% is a distinction. If the worst comes to worst, and let's absolutely hope it doesn't, but if it does, and the essay is not quite there yet, I never think it's a fail. I think it's just it's not quite there yet. Obviously, you'll get a lot of one-to-one support, and you would then need to just add in whatever needed doing and resubmit it. And that that happens to people. I don't think there's any more shame in that than having to do your driving test for the second time. It's as far as I'm concerned, honestly, it's neither here nor there. And I hold no judgments about that whatsoever. I understand that you would probably feel disappointed, but I don't hold any judgments about that whatsoever. And we will make sure that if you need some extra support to get through it second time round, you will absolutely receive that. And I won't go through this in great detail. You can pause and have a little read of this, but these are the criteria that Sussex give us. So if you look at the grading system, you'll notice that anything from a B minus and above is 70 and above, so that's a distinction. Anything from a C, C plus, that's a merit, and a D plus or a C minus, that's a pass. Okay, so you can have a little look at that. It's probably more useful to keep the overall level 7 assessment criteria in mind. So these are assessment criteria, general assessment criteria for master's level courses, and these come from the FHEQ, the Framework for Higher Education Qualifications. So these are sort of, the assessment criteria that nationally you would expect for master's level programs, and you pick out from their list the ones that are relevant to your own program. So obviously we're looking for fancy words, isn't it? A critical and analytical engagement with the material being discussed. In other words, whenever you're writing about a particular theory, you also have a point of view about it, and you're able to say why you think it's useful, or why you think it was relevant for you, or why you think it worked, not just say what it was. Obviously, an awareness, and this is really the essay, of the relationships between the theories and models you've studied and your own professional practice. So if you say, well, here's the theory of learning outcomes, and learning outcomes need to have these characteristics, and here's Bloom's taxonomy, and that's a useful list of words I can use in my learning outcomes. Then we need to see 2 things. First of all, some examples of learning outcomes you've actually produced yourself, because that would be a relationship between what you've learnt and what you've done. But then also some comments on, well, how good do you think your own learning outcomes are? Because again, that shows that you've understood both the theory and your own practice and how you're trying to improve it. Okay. This is right across your assignment. Your ability to critique your personal professional practice, identify areas for improvement, justify plans for future action. That's going to be in the essay, it's going to be in the professional values, and it's going to be in your CPD plan. And obviously, finally, that you've taken some care to present your work well, to make sure it's been properly proofread. It's not full of errors. The referencing is right, and all those sorts of technical things that you need to do at the end. Okay, so that's the overview, right? Um, let's have a little look then at some key bits of advice for the three sections. So let's start with that essay. And here I would say to you, just focus on 2 or 3 areas in depth, probably 2 to be honest. Do not try to cover everything superficially. The thing is, in that first PG Cert module, and I mean you've all engaged with it brilliantly. I've been so impressed right across the groups and so enjoyed working with you on it. We've done a lot. We've covered a lot. That whole constructive curriculum alignment model that we've used all the way through, has got lots of elements. It's got the assessment bit, it's got the planning the session bit, it's got the shape of the session, it's got teaching and learning activities, it's got feedback, it's got designing learning outcomes, it's got how you evaluate yourself and your students. There's masses and masses and masses in it. And sometimes the temptation is to try and write about all of it. Well, don't. Okay, just focus on 2 or 3 things in depth. And don't worry that you're not writing about all sorts of things that you do as a teacher, because you're going to have other opportunities later on in the course. Um, I know that many of you with whom I've had tutorials earlier on in the summer have already done this, but once you've decided to focus, do some reading, find some things that are relevant to what you're writing about, and this is the bit about being informed. You need to show that you've read things that are relevant to your ideas. It's a good place to start is to go back to the blogs, go back to the course textbooks, and follow links out from the course textbooks. And in your assignment across all 3 parts, you're aiming to get in about 20 different references from as many sources as possible. This is, well, I mean, it's important in that it's showing that you are informed, but also to be a little bit cynical about it. This is playing the academic game and showing Sussex University, when they look at your assignments, that you're not just writing about what you've done. You've engaged with this as an intellectual and academic piece of development. Okay, it's not about being clever or about being fancy. It's just about showing that you've read some stuff, and that more importantly, what you've read, you've been able to put into practice. That's all it is. I do think it's important to allow some time to draft, let it settle and revise it. I don't think it's possible just to write the essay. So, if you haven't started your write-up yet, now obviously would be the time to do it. And I think the main thing to think about is linking. You're trying to link up the things you've read with your own experience and your own practice. And really, as I said earlier on, show us how you've been thinking. Show us how you've been, deciding what to try to do, putting it into practice, being able to go, oh, that worked, oh, that didn't work, okay, what have I learned from it, right, what am I going to do next? That's how you show your thoughtfulness and thinking as a great teacher. And one way in which you can do this, there's lots of ways you can do it, but one way in which you can do this is to think about Jerome Bruner's stages of learning. I know you haven't studied Bruner yet, you're going to look at him in the constructivist section of Module 2, but basically you would structure writing about each topic in a way which goes something like this, and this is also using the PECTA system that we looked at together. So first of all, you meet some kind of theory which resonates with you in some way and suggests to you something you could do to improve your practice. Now I know, again, from reading, we all know from reading the blogs, you've all done loads of this. You learn something new and you go, oh, blimey, I used to do this and now I've started doing that, and oh, it's working much better. And you consider, and this is what you write about, how do I think about this theory? Because whatever theory or idea I've encountered, even if it's something as simple as how to write a good learning outcome, I've then got to think about how am I going to put that into practice in a way which best fits my teaching context. I've got to figure out how am I going to use this idea within the context of my own teaching. So think about learning outcomes. I might be thinking, well, what kind of learning outcomes are best for my teaching? Do I need functioning ones? Do I need declarative ones? How many would be good for a session? Do I just want to have basic learning outcomes, or do I want to put stretch ones in, or do I want to get students writing their own? There's loads of decisions that you make, and the only answers to those decisions come from really thinking about what would be most beneficial for your teaching and your students. So you need to kind of show how you were thinking about that and what your thought process was. And I always think, just as a sidebar, that when you're trying a theory out in practice, that's the only way in which you really learn to understand the theory. Otherwise, it's just words in a book, and it might be, you know, interesting or sound like it would be a good idea, but we don't know. We simply don't know until we try it. And that's the whole point about the PG Cert, is to try things out and experiment and see what happens. Okay, then you try something out in class, something new or an adaptation of what you've been doing before. And the first thing you're going to look for in that class is evidence to show me, okay, what's worked well and what hasn't worked well as I've tried to do this. I've tried to write some new learning outcomes. Have they been helpful to students? Have they not been helpful to students? How do I know? So it's like, what worked well, what didn't work well. Now, the little pitfall sometimes people put in here is they just merely say, oh, this worked really well. Well, I'm sure that's probably right, but you need to remember to include the evidence. So how was it that you knew something worked really well? Was it something that you observed yourself as a teacher? Then you can write about that. That's absolutely fine. Was it feedback you got from an observer? Was it feedback you got from students? Was it looking at the results of what the students did, the quality of their own work, and you thought, blimey, they did really well? You know, whatever it is, you just need to very simply state what's your evidence. Then you do the critical thinking part, which is, okay, reasons and explanations. First of all, it's in two parts. So why do I think that happened? If something worked really well and my students did great and produced better work than they'd ever produced before, why do I think that was? If we're going around the Kolb cycle, we're in the bottom now part of the cycle. We're in explain, or abstract conceptualization, if you prefer Kolb's own language. And it's really important because unless we have a good and accurate explanation for why things happened, we can't guarantee that we're going to be able to replicate it in future occasions. And if you remember, one of the things we said when we met and discussed the assignments back in June was we said, well, very often you don't actually know, or you don't know in a clear-cut way, because teaching and learning is a complicated old thing. So you may very well want to say your best hypothesis, but also your best alternative hypothesis. I think it's most likely to be that, but if that turns out to be wrong, I think it's this instead. And then you might say something about, how are you going to test those hypotheses out? How are you going to see whether your thinking is right or not? And then you bring it to a close by saying, okay, how effectively do I think I've used the theory now that I've tried it out? Did I use it well? Did I use it successfully? And what do I think I could do better next time? And that's the whole bit about reflection on your own practice and planning for improvement. And to me, that's just a very nice framework which allows you to do the whole thing about linking theory and practice together and showing us how you've been thinking, how you thought about planning, how you thought about putting things into action, how you thought about what you were seeing in front of you and the evidence you were noticing for what worked and what didn't work, how you thought about why that was, and how you're thinking about what you could do next to make things even better. If you get all those stages of your thinking in, then you'll write superb essays. Once you've got your first draft, two stages follow. The first one is editing. Now, this is the sort of the big picture stage. It's the macro stage. So you have a little look. You may very well find that you've written a bit much. That quite often happens. That's absolutely fine. So the first thing then is to go through it and be absolutely ruthless and go, right, have I written anything that doesn't really directly answer the question? Are there any bits where I've just been sort of chatting on about stuff or describing stuff at great length that doesn't need to be described at great length? In other words, are there bits where I'm just showing what happened, but I'm not really showing my thinking? Because remember, that's the key thing. And a good way of doing this is to put yourself in the reader's position as well, and also looking at the structure to think, okay, if I hadn't been in the classroom and I didn't know what this particular example of teaching was about, because I hadn't been there, would somebody reading it be able to follow all the points I'm making? Would it be really clear what I'm talking about? And are those points in the right order so that there's a nice logical flow? So the reader starts it, goes, oh, okay, right, okay, they decided to use that theory, that's grand. Oh, that's what they decided to do when they put it into practice. Well, yeah, I can see that makes sense because I realised that they had 400 students in the room and they were BA Year 1 and they were doing a module they didn't really want to do. So, okay, that's the context. So give me the context. Make sure everything's relevant to developing your own argument, and your overall argument really is going to be about what have you learned, what you're going to do differently next time. And make sure that the links between all the points are there. Sometimes people will jump from one thing to another, and I'm like, oh, hang on, I can't quite see how those things are connected. So it's really about the big picture and the overall structure. Get rid of anything that doesn't need to be there, and then all the stuff that's left, does it just sort of flow and sequence in a way that's going to really help a reader who will Start reading the essay knowing nothing about what you're writing about. Sometimes we forget because we're so familiar with it in our own heads and we've been thinking about it for so long, we can almost assume that other people will know about it as well, and they don't. And then the final stage is the proofreading stage, which is okay. Now that I've got the whole thing in shape and I've got all the different bits, now I need to just do the polishing really. I find it quite useful myself to read the essay aloud, and any sentences where I think, I'm not quite sure if I understood that sentence, that's a sentence that needs a bit of tidying up and clarifying. Very often people write sentences that are just too long and messy, and you may find that the simplest thing to do is to take a very long sentence and turn it into two shorter, more direct sentences. Don't be afraid to be very direct and straightforward. Um, I think there's a useful rule of thumb, which is that if sentences are longer than 17 words, they begin to get complicated. I'm not saying you have to just write short sentences, but just make sure that no one's going to get halfway through a sentence and go, sorry, what are you writing about? Because that doesn't really work. Obviously, a little check for spelling and grammar. You can, by the way, get someone to help you with proofreading. That's not cheating at all. Get someone else to read it and just ask them the question, okay, which bits didn't make sense? Because that's a great bit of feedback from somebody to go, yeah, I got that. I have no idea what you're talking about here. And then you look at it and go, okay, right, how do I make that clearer to someone? And then finally, obviously, making sure all your references are in there and everything's been done in the appropriate Harvard referencing style. And then it's good to hand in. That'll be fine. Okay, great. So the next section is your professional values section. It's about 1,000 words. And the thing to remember there is for each value you discuss, first of all, just state what the value is. And you don't need to justify why you've picked it. If I say, it's really important to me that my classroom's a safe space, I don't need to justify that. I'm merely saying that is one of my values, and that's perfectly fine. What you then need to do, however, where you're going to use your words, is then you say, well, okay, how do I try to make that value real in practice? If I want my classroom to be challenging or democratic or inclusive or whatever it is, or it's a value about myself. I want to be well informed, or I want to be student centered, or I want to be fair. What is it that I try to do to make that real in practice? And then, bit of evaluation. Oh, I've said a but of evaluation. Sorry, I didn't proofread this properly. See, that's a problem if you don't proofread things properly. A bit of evaluation. You want to just discuss, well, okay, how happy am I with the success of that? And it might be different in different contexts. I want my classroom to be a safe space. I do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, in my group of 12, I can tell it's working really well and I can give some evidence to support that. In my group of 30, no, it's not working as well and I can give some evidence to support that. So you can say how happy you are with the success of this. And actually, if you've got any ideas of some things you want to change or develop or make better next year, then this would be a good place to say that as well. And that's basically what you write for your professional values. So what it is, how you're trying to make it real, and how happy you are with how successful that is right now. And how many to include is a bit like asking how long's a ball of string. So only do as many as you have space for. And it might be 3, it might be 4. I'd be very surprised if it was any more than that, because by the time you've got into the discussion, you are using up your words, and you don't have oodles and oodles of space. So again, you might write a little introduction which goes, well, do you know what? I sat down and thought about this, and I've realised I've got 8 professional values that are important to me, and you just list the 8 and you go, in this assignment I'm going to focus on these 3, and then you just go into it, and that was completely fine. And then the final thing you write, which actually for many people is probably fewer than 500 words, which is handy because then you can put words into other parts of your assignment, and you do this on the template and you can just do it in bullet points, that's absolutely fine, is your professional development plan. Now again, it's about keeping this really focused. So I would say 3 goals maximum, but 2 is also absolutely fine. One of them, we would like it to be an area which is already somewhat of a strength for you, but which you want to really become excellent at and max out on. So it's not just things that you're not doing well. It could be things that are already good, but could become excellent. So look for one that's like that, and look for one area which is a weakness. Now remember, we said something's not a weakness just because someone else is better at it than you are. You may be looking at an area that's an area of your strength. A weakness is something which is in some way getting in your way, right? So you're looking for something which is getting in your way, which is really preventing your teaching from being as great as it could be, and which you realise you would really benefit from overcoming, and probably your students would benefit from you overcoming as well. So one area which is somewhat of a strength, one area which is a weakness, and if you want to, you can add a third, which might be of either kind, but you don't have to add a third, but two or three is fine. And I say that simply because, if you try to do too many, then nothing gets done. So you're better to focus on a couple of things, and then they will get done. And here's an example of the template. And what I want you to notice is that for this assignment, you only fill in the first three columns, because the first three columns are where you're planning it. So the area, you state the area for development, you state the specific goals you want to achieve, and you say what right now you're planning on doing in order to help yourself develop and achieve those goals. So that's the forward plan. We're going to keep this over the rest of the PG Cert, and those final two columns then are columns for you to reflect on what you've done and whether it worked as you go along over the next 15 months. So you don't put anything in those now. And in the third column, as you will see from the example, it's not compulsory, but what's quite a nice way to do it is you might want to put in something where you can do some reading or get more informed, because there may be things you need to learn about in order to achieve your goal, and then something that you're thinking of doing, a situation that you're creating for yourself where you're going to give yourself the opportunity to practice and to improve. So again, you might want to think about, how am I going to find out more so I get more informed, and how am I going to practice? Um, and that is it. I hope that was helpful and useful to you all.